Welcome to More Than Miles, where we use storytelling and expert interviews to empower endurance athletes and healthcare providers. I'm Dr. Mihevc Edwards, physical therapist, author, educator, entrepreneur, and former endurance athlete.
And I'm Dr. Casey Saunders, physical therapist, runner, and triathlete, and together we're your co-hosts. Our goal is to always keep our athletes healthy on and off the road, because we know that our athletes are so much more than their body and their sport. We're glad you're on this journey with us. Now let's get to the show. Well, welcome to today's podcast. So today's conversation is going to be about a topic that we don't think about much as endurance athletes and as healthy individuals in general. We don't really think about the fact that maybe there could be underlying health conditions that we don't know about. And so the vessel for this conversation is going to be my wonderful colleague, Dr. Mihevc Edwards, and her story. And we'll undoubtedly get into athletic identity and a lot of things that really affect our patients in this population that we deal with on a daily basis. So, Kate, I want you to start and tell me about the first time you thought that something might be wrong.
Oh, well, the first time I thought something was wrong or the first time I ignored it?
I think the first time that you ignored it would probably be a better place to start.
Absolutely. I ran for a long time. I did multiple marathons and half marathons. I did triathlon, ran the Boston Marathon 3 times. And I think that it was 13 or 14 marathons total. I'm not really sure what, and I'm sure if we looked at it online, we'd figure it out. But you know me.
Yeah, you've got me beat in number of marathons. So.
Oh, well, I don't know. But all I know is don't trust the numbers when it comes out of my mouth. But anyway, of those 13 or 14 marathons, I actually passed out in 3. The first time that I passed out in a marathon was the Vermont City Marathon. And it was a warm day. It was about 80 degrees out, but it wasn't bad. I hate the heat. Everyone that knows me knows that. So 80 degrees feels very, very hot to me. But it was hot out and I was under a lot of stress. There was a lot going on in my life. I ran the race and I was feeling pretty good overall for the circumstances. But then at about mile 20 or so, I started to weave all over the course. And while I was weaving all over the course, the medical providers on the sidelines asked me to come off the course and pulled me off. They proceeded to give me water and food and then asked me to go in the ambulance, which I decided not to do. I said I refused to get in the ambulance and I was very badly behaved and I didn't get in the ambulance. So I stayed on the side of the road with them for about an hour and somehow I convinced them that I was fine and I would be able to run the rest of the marathon. Well, they were very smart and didn't trust me. So one of the guys said, "Fine, I'll ride my bike next to you." And he rode his bike almost the rest of the way with me until there was about a mile left and forced me to run while I was going in. So then I ran and he left. And as soon as he left, I ran the last mile, of course. Of course. And that day I thought that I was overheated. So it wasn't necessarily that I thought something was wrong, which there was, but I thought I must have done something wrong. I didn't drink enough. I didn't prepare enough. I'm probably undertrained. So I blamed it on myself. And as we know, negative self-talk is not good. And I was the best at that. So I just kind of talked badly to myself and chalked it up to a bad day.
You mentioned the weaving in the road, but what were you feeling? Like what kind of symptoms were you having?
Yes, and these are symptoms that I had on many runs after this. But I was dizzy. I felt confused. I was tired. I think the confusion was the biggest piece of it. I really didn't know where I was or what was going on. And that's why they could see and pulled me off the course. So that was the first time really that anything happened. And I went back to Atlanta. I was living in Atlanta. I am living in Atlanta now, but living in Atlanta at the time. And I actually went to a physician and they checked me out and they thought that everything was fine. So I moved on and continued to run. A few years later, I was running another marathon and it was the Philadelphia Marathon. And this is a scary one. This one should have shook me to the core, but of course it didn't. I don't know if it's because I'm an endurance athlete or because I'm a healthcare provider, or it's just a bad combination, the two.
Or just stubborn.
Okay, fine. Maybe a little stubborn.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But I ran the Philadelphia Marathon and I was feeling great. I was on par to qualify for the Boston for the first time. And I was running, and about mile 25, it was mile 25, I started to not feel great. But then at mile 26, I could almost see the finish line. And I started feeling not so well, and I actually lost control of my bladder. And I thought, wow, I've read about this before, but oh God, what is this? And then I saw the finish line, and I was about to qualify, and I remember going down. And then I don't remember anything else, except I heard people saying, come on, get up. And two people grabbed me underneath my arms, basically helped me carry me to the finish line. And they said, if you don't stand up and cross the finish line, it doesn't count. And that's what I remember. I don't remember seeing anything, but that's what I remember.
Oh my gosh.
I woke up in a medical tent with a lot of things hooked up to me, EKGs, physicians, people, nurses everywhere, all around me. And I thought, what the hell am I doing here? Get away from me. And again, I really wasn't a very good patient. And I was confused, not sure what was going on. And when I stabilized, they said, you really need to go see a cardiologist when you get home. And I was in my 20s. And I said, why do I need to see a cardiologist? And it scared me enough, though. I woke up and I had bruises all over my elbows, all over my knees. I even had a bruise on my face. And then, of course, the only thing I cared about was if I finished the race or not, and in what time.
Of course.
So I Googled the race finish to see if I finished. I was in my college roommate's room. I mean, it was past college, but she was there for graduate school, and we Googled it, and I had in fact crossed the finish line. And there were photographs of me crossing the finish line with my arms up over my head, which is incredible because I remember nothing of it. And then of course I finished, but I didn't have a medal to show for it because I was in the medical tent. A few weeks later, I wrote the race director and asked for my medal.
Of course you did. You needed that medal.
Oh, God. But it was really scary. At that point, I went home and I saw a cardiologist again, and they did stress testing. And they did so many tests. I passed everything with flying colors. They said, you're fine. You were probably dehydrated. Continue on. So that was the second marathon. And then I continued on, and for a few years I didn't run as fast as I had that day, and I didn't push myself as hard just because of the circumstances of my life. And I ran with a few people that were a little bit slower than me, and I didn't really have many symptoms for a while. And then during residency, I was in Chicago, and again, under a lot of stress, and maybe trained less than I should have, but I probably trained well. If, knowing myself, I really stuck to the schedule. But I ran the Chicago Marathon. My husband and I started out together. He wasn't my husband at the time. And as we were running, he said he felt like he had a cold. So I said, well, I'm leaving you and I'm going to run because I don't want to be stuck behind here with a bad time. So I was running, and at about mile 20, I started to feel bad, like I needed to sit down. And it was just this gut feeling like I need to sit down. There's something wrong. I don't know what it is. But so I walk over to, I get out of the race. I walk over to the curb. I sit down and I black out. I woke up with my feet above my head, and a physician that was running the race nearby and a police officer. They had called the ambulance, and they said I had to go on the ambulance. Yet again, I refused to go on the ambulance. Then suddenly my husband runs by. I can't believe I woke up and saw him, and I yelled to him, and he came over, and he said, what do you mean you're not getting in the ambulance? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Get your you-know-what in the ambulance now. And I said, well, if I get in the ambulance, can I finish the race? And they said no. So it took them another 25 or 30 minutes to convince me to get in, which is so stupid because I'll be honest with you, I work in the medical tent major races. And if people behave that way, I'm so angry about it, but I get it.
Yeah, you're in athlete mode.
Right. I got in the ambulance. They took me to the hospital and pumped me full of fluids and said I was dehydrated yet again. That was a long answer to your first question, but those are the three big ones, like the three big marathon things early on that tipped me off that something was wrong, but nobody believed me because I was a healthy athlete running a pretty quick marathon and young.
And after all of your tests had come back fine. I want you to talk a little bit about kind of being in that in-between space of, well, I'm having this problem, but things are obviously not fine. So how are you feeling and processing sort of that disparity?
I think at that moment in time, I was not processing that disparity. I said, you said I'm fine, so I'm fine. And I continued on. The difference and what happened later was I got pregnant. I ran during pregnancy the entire time. And it was great. I ran half marathon. Every weekend we probably ran 10-mile long runs because if I didn't run, I threw up. So, running was really great for that.
Good incentive,
Good
for
incentive.
sure.
But then I had a baby. I had my son, Andrew, and I started to get back into running afterwards. And I never felt right. Probably about 3 months after I had Andy, I started training again, and probably about 5 months after I ran my first half marathon. But every run I went out on, I didn't feel good. I felt out of shape. I felt out of breath. I felt once in a while my heart would skip a beat. And I thought, this is because I'm postpartum. I'm too out of shape. I should push myself harder. I should train harder. I should train faster. I should do more. Which again is the mindset of an endurance athlete, and you think nothing of it. So I did that. I trained harder, I trained faster, I trained more, and I signed up for a half Ironman. And I ran my first half marathon January. And during the race, I felt great in the beginning. I went out, and at mile 10, I looked down at my Garmin, and my heart rate was at 310 beats per minute. And I didn't feel great, but I didn't feel awful. I felt scared. I felt like my heart was racing, but I thought my Garmin was broken.
It's not a number you usually see on your Garmin.
No, it's not. And so I started to walk, and then every time I tried to run again, the number would go up. So I ran the last few miles of the race, and I finally crossed the finish line, and I didn't tell a single person because I thought it was because I was out of shape. I thought I had done something wrong. There was something wrong with me and my training, not something wrong with my body. And so I never told anybody, and I felt awful for days, really. And then, I kept going and training, and I remember thinking, my heart rate's going a little crazy because I'm breastfeeding. Oh, I'm really exhausted and going to bed at 7 p.m. because I'm the new mom of a 1-year-old. Or almost 1-year-old. And I kept making excuses for myself. Every time I would feel something unsettling, I would make excuses. And I remember being on a run with one of my running partners, and I said, I really need to stop for a second and walk a little bit. And she'd be like, okay. And I said, I'm so sorry. I'm just out of shape. She's like, you'll get back. It's no big deal. Looking back, it was definitely an arrhythmia. I was in arrhythmia and didn't know it. Then fast forward a little bit, I ran another marathon in March, or half marathon in March. And it was funny because I was afraid to push myself, and I kept trying to keep my heart rate under, I don't know what it was, like 140, because I was afraid something was going to happen. And in that moment, I should have known I should go get help. But instead, I didn't tell anybody. I just kept watching my watch and trying to keep it low. And that was the last half marathon I ever ran. If I had known at the time, I would have slowed down even more and really taken it in, and I really would have enjoyed it instead of being afraid. It was a beautiful day. It was cold, which is my favorite, and I did get to pass some people, which I love. Yeah, it was my last half marathon because on my son's first birthday in April, I went out for a regular 5-mile training run for the half marathon I was training. And I ran around the block, and I kept getting short of breath and feeling a little confused. And then I'd get angry at myself and say, what's wrong with you? Why why are you going so slow? You should train harder, and lots of negative self-talk. And then I decided that since I had such a crappy run, maybe I should push myself as hard as possible for the last mile. And I did. And I stopped in front of my house, and immediately I stopped and I felt my bra. It was like it was strangling me, and I could see my heart beating outside of my chest. And I looked down, and my Garmin said 250, 260, 270, 280, 310. And I knew that something was really wrong. It was the first moment that it hit me. So I sat on my front porch, put my head between my legs, and started diaphragmatically breathing because, I'm a PT. And I said, I'm not going to go inside because if I die right now, I want someone to find me. I don't want it to be my husband and my son when they come home from work and school. And that was my son's first birthday.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a loaded story.
It was a loaded story. Okay. So that incident happens. We're like, okay, something's wrong.
Yeah.
Where did you go from there?
I didn't tell anybody again, but I was scared. So when I went to work the next day, actually my colleague, I said to her, can you take my blood pressure? I think there's something wrong. And I told her what happened. And she went up to the front desk, canceled all of my patients, and said, go to the doctor right now. And I'm like, it's not that serious. And she said, this is very serious. You are not allowed to be here. So I left. And I couldn't get into my primary care physician because I hadn't been there in like a year and a half. No, maybe it was like 3 years. So long that they didn't really know me anymore because I had been healthy. So I went to an urgent care, and the doctor there immediately said, I think you have bradycardia, because my resting heart rate was 38, which as an endurance athlete, that's not abnormal. But he was concerned that there was some rhythm issue, and he immediately referred me to electrophysiologist. And I got into his office that day, and he's the guy that figured it out. He did a lot of the same tests that everybody else did, but he did them differently. He listened to me. He thought I was completely insane, of course, which, I mean, to be fair, I was. All I wanted to do was run. And he put me on a treadmill and started making me run. And I passed the test, the stress test that he was giving me. But then he did one thing. He said, can you make it come on? And I said, of course I can make it come on. I do it all the time. He said, make it come on. I said, well, I have to go a lot faster. So I pumped up the treadmill to like 7-minute miles, and I put it on an incline, and I started running. And then it came on, and I didn't feel it at first. All I remember is him saying, stop the treadmill, stop the treadmill, stop the treadmill. And they stopped the treadmill, and I looked over, and I was in VTAC, ventricular tachycardia, and I felt fine. And he said, can't you feel that? I said, oh, I feel a little thing in my heart, but I feel fine. He's like, sit down, don't do anything. From there, it was a long road. It took about 9 months to diagnose what was wrong with me. And, I write about it in my book, Racing Heart, but it's like they took something away from me every week. At first, it was just run a little slower. Then it was run a little bit less. And then it was run slower and run less. And then it was don't run at all. And maybe you shouldn't even exercise right now. It took so many tests and so many people talking back and forth. And I went to another physician who's a sports cardiologist, and he ended up working with my EP, and together they found my diagnosis, which is arrhythmogenic right ventricular cardiomyopathy, or ARVC. It's a rare genetic heart disease.
So tell me a little bit about what happens when you have ARVC.
In ARVC, the cells in the heart wall, they break. So it's kind of the glue, the desmosomes, the bridges in the cells that break. And when those break, the cells die, and they cause scarring on the heart. And the scars make it so that the electrical signal of your heart doesn't function the way it's supposed to. So that's where arrhythmias come in. And that's when they can become very dangerous, because sometimes when you have an arrhythmia, or unfortunately a lot of people, if they go into ventricular tachycardia, go down and never wake up. And so that's the first component of it. And then, over years, if you continue to exercise with this disease, exercise actually makes it worse, which is devastating. Finally can talk about it. But your heart cells become or your heart wall becomes floppy, and you might go into cardiac failure because you can't pump anymore. Now, not everybody does that. And if you stop doing extreme exercise and you take care of yourself, they say it may never progress, or it might progress just a little bit. But many people progress and have to have heart transplants.
Mm-hmm. So after you get your diagnosis, what happens next? So how do you kind of move forward from that?
The reason we really wanted to tell this story was, one, is that just because you're healthy doesn't mean you don't listen to the signs and symptoms of everything going on. I ignored things for a long time, and most of us as endurance athletes ignore things. But there are people out there that can help, and you really should get help, and you really should get screened if you're having any of those symptoms, right? Dizziness, shortness of breath, passing out, absolutely. Any kind of palpitations, that type of thing with running, extra fatigue with exertion. So that's part of it. But then the second part is what you just brought up, and is athletic identity, right? So what happens when you get this diagnosis? I was completely devastated, and I didn't believe it. I said, this isn't me. I don't have this. And they said I needed a defibrillator, which I now have. But I said, no, I'm not getting a defibrillator. I'm going to Mexico instead.
Your escapism there.
Oh, yeah, right? So I went to Mexico for a week with my best friend, and none of my physicians agreed with it. They thought it was a very bad idea, rightfully so. And I thought about it. But the reason I did it, and again, I didn't want somebody else, another person, to tell me what I needed to do with my body. I had no control at that point. I was unable to do anything I wanted to do. They had taken everything away from me, and now they were going to tell me they need to put this defibrillator in my body. I was not having it, and I was not ready. And I honestly think it's a life-saving device, and if you need it, you should get it. That's my opinion. And I don't want to get in trouble here, but I don't think you need to get it unless you're ready for it emotionally. And I wasn't ready for it emotionally. So when I came back from Mexico, I did it. And the reason I did it is because I had a 1-year-old. And if I hadn't had my son, I probably wouldn't have done it, truth be told, until later, if I was lucky enough to have a later. But it was my son and having my son that made me do it. All of that, I got the defibrillator, and then I had to deal with the gravity of the situation.
Which happened very quickly. Right? Going from like things being normal to, wow, things are not normal at all.
Yeah.
So I know you've gotten into some other forms of exercise that you enjoy, right?
Yeah.
Swapping our beloved endurance exercise for yoga and strength training. But it wasn't easy just to switch it out, was it?
No. So endurance, like as an endurance athlete, it's often your entire life. It's who you are. And, I say this all the time. If you ever hear me saying this more than once, I'm sorry, it's just true. It's what we eat. It's what we wear. It's who our friends are. It's everything, that bubble. And when you have that one day and the next day you don't, you feel lost. You don't know what to do anymore. And, for me, unfortunately, it was a devastating, catastrophic injury, if you will, that took me out of running, and that, hasn't allowed me to do it. But for some people, it's not. It's a knee injury, an ankle sprain, or back pain, and they can never run again. You lose that, and you don't know who you are. And so for me, I had to get help. I had to reach out to a counselor or a psychologist and talk to them, figure out how to deal with losing something that was so integral in my life. And I did a lot of work. I had to do tons of work, a lot of self-reflection, asking myself, why is it that I push myself to the brink all the time? Why do I feel like every time I go out to run, I need to run as fast as possible for as long as possible and make sure that I'm the last one standing? Why did I need to do 25 hill repeats? Nobody's looking. What was that about my personality in my past that was driving that unhealthy behavior? Now, look, training hard is great. I'm not saying that that's not healthy behavior, but the way I was doing it was not necessarily healthy. And I was definitely running away from some demons, which I think a lot of us do in endurance sports. So the first thing was dealing with that, which, I don't think you ever stop dealing with that. I think you continue to deal with that on a regular basis. And If you were to ask me today, would I go for a run if I could, I would leave this podcast right now and Forrest Gump it out of here, and you may never see me again. Someone else would have to run the practice.
I believe that wholeheartedly. I remember this story striking me very hard, and I feel like it was actually, when I talk to, when I eventually do talk about what my story and what I've been through, I think that because I saw a lot of parallels between how I was living my life and how you had lived your life previously. And I put myself in those shoes thinking, okay, like I have something that's not an orthopedic injury that prevents me from being able to run and do what I really love. And I could not conceptualize how I would ever move on in my life from that. And it was a big light bulb moment for me where I was like, there's something wrong with what I'm doing too. Like if I can't imagine and I feel like my life would literally end, there's something I have to work out too. And so I'm always grateful for your story. And I know that it really catalyzed a lot of deep thinking on my part too. And so I've always been curious. I know that there's so much that goes into it. This is not an easy answer, but how did you move on from that?
Well, I think that you just have to make a decision. My decision was I going to be miserable or was I going to be happy in this life? And maybe that sounds cut and dry, but that was the decision I had to make. And I had to work at it really hard. And I'm not going to tell you that I don't grieve still, because I do. It's been a long time. It's been several years, but I still grieve. Recently my husband and I were somewhere and he woke up early and got dressed to go for a run. And I woke up and I saw him in his running clothes and I literally wanted to throw something at him. And he left and I started crying. And I thought, wow, this is still bothering me all these years later. And then he came back. He's such a wonderful human, thank God. He came back and I was mad at him, like so mad I couldn't talk to him. And he looked at me and he said, "What's wrong?" I said, "I love you so much and I'm really sorry that I'm angry at you. Maybe it's not logical, but you going for a run today has made me feel really angry and I need to leave and you can't come with me." And I went for a long walk. And, walking is not the same, of course, but I was at least outside moving my body. And I think that for me, I came back and I was able to talk to him again and say, "Hey, thank you for giving me that space." And he said, "Thank you for sharing with me what happened." And that conversation would not have been possible 5-6 years ago. We couldn't have had such an open, vulnerable conversation about that because I wasn't ready emotionally. And so I think it's just a lot of work in dealing with your demons and then finding other things. Nothing feels as good as a run. I'm not going to lie. Nothing I don't think ever could. But I really actually love strength training now, which is hilarious. I was just admiring my own butt in the mirror earlier.
She was, it's true.
And I say that because I was like, wow, I look really strong. And being able to feel strong again has been really important for me, all joking aside. But I said but. However, finding other outlets. And, I did that from a physical standpoint, and I did yoga every single day for a long time. Now I did about 3 times a week, and I meditate, which I really wish I had done when I was running. And I always encourage my patients to do that because I think it takes the edge off and it allows you great mental imagery. It allows you to really come down and be in the present, which I think is very useful. And then the other thing, which is maybe not as healthy, is that I went from complete physical exhaustion and extreme, doing everything as hard as possible, to I just really love to work. And now I always have a lot of projects, and I built a business, and there's so many things that I'm doing now that are mental activity. So I went from one extreme to the other. So now I'm trying to find my way back to the middle. And it probably will take years.
Yeah, it's all a process, both like grieving and adapting and all those things. I've been on the other side of this work, and I will check my email at 10 at night and I'll have 8 emails from you because you're on some work tirade. Wonderful work. But it does, I can attest I can attest to the swapping of physical and mental work.
And it's interesting because that's not necessarily the healthiest thing to do, but I mean, that drive that you have as an endurance athlete, it doesn't go away. That's the thing. Like, it doesn't go away. I'm still as driven as I was before, and I still love a good schedule. Give me a schedule any day. I'll be so happy. I think those are all pieces of being an endurance athlete, even that type A personality we talk about. And yeah, and so I will. It's true. Like, I can't wait to work, which just sounds so silly, but like, when my son goes to bed or if my husband is doing something else, I'll be like, yes, I have like a whole hour and I can do all this stuff. And I do. I send 500 emails or write, a book or come up with a new company.
Yeah, it's truly amazing. Honestly, your work capacity is truly amazing. But I have seen you rest and listen to yourself a lot more. So I'm interested in how you got to that place to where you can recognize when you're potentially burning out or doing too much, and how you interrupt that and sort of pivot when that starts to happen.
Yeah, that's a great point. And again, I think this is for anybody, whether you're running or not, being able to self-recognize when you're burning yourself out. Because burning yourself out and exhaustion leads to overtraining and many other things, right? Again, it took me a long time, and it's a lot of self-reflection. But again, one day I decided that I didn't need to be tired all the time. What was the point? Who was I pushing myself for? Does it really matter if I work till midnight, or can my idea wait until the morning? And I think it's just this moment, this aha moment, if you will. You're like, wow, okay, so maybe I should do yoga instead of working for 4 more hours, because that is better for my body. That feels better. And I also found that the more breaks I give myself, whether that be going for a walk in the woods, doing yoga, meditating, or reading, the more creative and productive I actually am. And when you realize that and track it, because of course I'm tracking everything, you say, oh, okay, it's worth it to give yourself a break.
Yeah. And did meditation play a role in that as well? Like being able to tap in and be like, actually be able to recognize when that was happening? Absolutely.
I mean, I meditate every single day, usually before work. And sometimes I'll do it for 10 minutes. Sometimes I'll do it for 30 minutes. But with meditation, it breaks the cycle. That little voice in your head, the storyteller telling you that you're not good enough, or you're not worthy enough, or you need to do more. The meditation actually breaks that cycle, and it allows quiet. And when it's quiet, I don't know, I feel like you just have so much rest, and you can be so much more productive eventually.
Yeah, because so much of us are like go, go, go. So having that stop and signal to stop, I think, is we can really, get somewhere when we're able to slow down a little bit.
I think so too. And I think that, one of the things my patients, of course, hate is when I say you should meditate. I get they look at me with daggers in their eyes. But I tell them my story, but also it's not failing if you start meditating and now you're doing your grocery list, but then you bring yourself back. And then you're thinking about picking up your kid at the bus. Oh, but then you bring yourself back. I think that really you never can meditate poorly. You just have to do it. And I know this is really off topic, but I think that it comes with the mental health component of taking care of ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And finding a practice that works for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Yeah, I think so. And then, back to some of the cardiologist stuff, because I think at some point I would love to have my sports cardiologist on the show. I don't know when it'll be, but he is incredible, and it would be good for everybody to kind of hear his perspective. And what I've learned from him is incredible. And the thing is, endurance athletes aren't immune to cardiac disease. It's just because you're healthy, just because you're fit, doesn't mean you're immune to that. And I think understanding and recognizing in your own body, instead of pushing yourself to the brink, if you feel something funny, get help. Like immediately, don't wait, because there are so many people that have what I have that don't get a second chance and don't wake up. And, that's it for them. So I'm very lucky I had several chances. It wasn't a second chance. I think it happened to me 5 or 6 times. I think it happened multiple times, and I feel very lucky to share that story and hopefully inspire people to ask for help when they need it.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we touched on this a little bit, but what symptoms would you ask people to really pay attention to? Like, don't kind of pass this off as dehydration. Like, this is something you should really get checked out.
One of the major things is family history. If you have somebody in your family that has died at an early age, keep that in mind, okay? Because family history is one of the number one predictors of cardiac disease. The second piece is if you are exercising and you're getting symptoms on exertion, that's an issue. If you are running at a 8-minute or a 10-minute mile pace, whatever your pace is, and that pace usually feels really good and really easy, but you've noticed over time that same pace and nothing else has changed is now really, really hard, that might be a signal. Or you're getting out of breath on runs or exercise, doing some kind of exercise that you normally wouldn't get out of breath on. Or palpitations. I mean, that's a big one, palpitations. And of course, many things can cause it. It doesn't mean it's necessarily a cardiac issue, but that's certainly something to pay attention to. If you black out, forget it. You have to go see somebody. Just if you black out and go down, you have to see somebody. And be persistent because, like I said, I was looked at several times, but it's because I was with the wrong physicians. I needed a sports cardiologist and I didn't have that. Or I needed an EP that would listen to me and I didn't have that. The other signs are extreme fatigue. That doesn't make sense. You know, I was going to bed at 7 o'clock at night, every night, and I thought that was normal. And normally, you know, I go to bed early, but not that early. But my bedtime started to creep up earlier and earlier and earlier. And I was so tired. And I chalked it up to everything else. I made lots of excuses. And I think those are the biggest ones, really. But just abnormalities. We're athletes. We know how our body functions, but actually pay attention to our body and to the signals that's giving you.
Yeah, and this can be at any age, right? So younger and even older, it's not necessarily maybe you don't have a genetic heart condition, but we can pick up on some early heart disease, things like that, if we really pay attention to our bodies and how we respond to exercise. I always want to thank you for sharing this story because I always get something out of it. I've listened to you speak, I've read your book, I've heard it so many times, and I always get something new out of it, and I always like kind of recontemplate my relationship with my sport and how I approach things. I'm so excited for other people to get to hear that. I also want them to read your book because they should. You can get the whole story. I know it's made a big difference for me, and I know it'll make a big difference for others too.
Thank you, Casey. And I'm glad to hear that since you've heard it so many times, you're not putting your fingers in your ears saying, oh, gosh, I wish she wouldn't tell that story again.
No, I'm like shaking with emotion right now. It never gets lost on me. And I honestly think about you like anytime I'm feeling bad running or during a race, because I'm so lucky to be there.
Yeah.
I'm so lucky to be there. And so it always brings me back a little bit.
That's good. Well, I'm so glad you're there, and I'm so glad so many people can run, and I really do hope that that's the sentiment that people get from this. You know what I mean? Saying, oh gosh, I am lucky to run. Wow, I complain about going out for this 5-mile run when it's hot out and I'm tired, but you should love that. I mean, I just remember the last half, I said it earlier, but the last half marathon I ever ran, if I had only known it was going to be my last one, I would have done it a little bit differently. God, I miss it every day, but I'm very happy to be here. I'm very lucky to be here, and there's a lot of good that's come out of it.
So much good that's come out of it. It's something that we're all grateful for sure.
Thank you.
Well, Kate, anything else you want to add? I think we're close to wrapping up.
Yep. No, I think that the other thing is just look in the show notes. We'll put a couple things there, and if you guys have questions about this or anybody's not sure what to do, you can always email us, reach out to us, and we're happy to help. And of course, we have a lot of connections, or I have a lot of connections in this area, sports cardiology and such, that, I just hope that this episode helps somebody.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thanks so much, Kate.
Thank you for hanging out with us. We hope you enjoyed today's conversation. As if you can't tell, we absolutely love spreading knowledge about endurance athletes and their health.
Be sure to subscribe and rate the show on iTunes or whichever platform you happen to be listening in from. Also, share the show with your friends, running buddies, training partners, family, your dog, or scream it from the rooftops. Whatever works for you. See you soon!